I've said for years, blindfold me, put me in front of a map, let me throw a dart. Wherever it lands, I'll get on a plane and go there. And I'm telling you right now that give me a few hours, I can find covenant-keeping women who can hold their own with any women in the planet.
Hello, Magnify. I'm Laurel Day, president of Deseret Book Company, and I'm honored to be joining you from the hosting seat today. In this episode, I'm sitting down with my friend and mentor, Sheri Dew. She's the executive vice president and chief content officer of Deseret Management Corporation. Sheri left a mark on all of us when she served in the General Relief Society presidency from 1997 to 2002. She's also the author of many books, including the recent Prophets See Around Corners, as well as Insights from a Prophet's Life, the biography of Russell M. Nelson. I've known Sheri since 1998 when I got hired at Deseret Book Company, and I've basically reported to her directly since 2004. So I have a lot of history with this woman. She has hands down been one of the most influential people in my life. But I'm not sure I've ever totally connected what makes Sheri Sheri until I had the chance for this conversation. Sheri is a seeker, and you're going to hear several questions that she has asked throughout her life that have stretched her and taught her, and maybe most importantly, given her a deeper connection to heaven. This conversation richly blessed my life, and I trust it will do the same for you. Well, welcome, Sheri, to the Magnify podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
We're so glad to have you. One of the conversations that we like to have at Magnify is with women who we respect and admire and who we see as a force for good. And so we'd love to hear some of what's on your heart and mind and what has shaped you today. I wanted to start by asking you if you could share with us when you first felt the spark of a testimony. I have a memory of a talk you gave about the impact of your grandmother on your testimony too. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about your growing up and the development of your testimony.
Well, I grew up in a little tiny branch in southwest Kansas. And as a little girl, until I was about probably a freshman in high school or thereabouts, we went to church in the Oddfellows Hall. And my grandma would get me. We lived down on the farm, and my grandma would take me in early because we would go in to sweep up the cigarette butts and throw away the wine bottles and the beer cans before church. And I can still smell that Oddfellows Hall. Mm. It was a mixture of sweat and alcohol and who knows what other aromas created that smell. But that's where we met on Sunday. Probably the earliest stirrings for me where I started to, my parents were active in the church. We always went to church. Yes, my grandma and Grandpa Dew lived, we all lived on the same farm together. And my grandma was just like my hero, my heroine. So I was a little shadow following her around. I was her eldest granddaughter. But probably the earliest stirrings, and I wouldn't have known what it was at the time, but I was baptized in a chapel that was an hour and 20 minutes drive away. But then I was confirmed in a fast and testimony meeting in the Oddfellows Hall.
Oh, wow.
And, you can kind of picture it, right? It doesn't feel like there would be anything spiritual about that. But when my dad took me up front and I was surrounded by him, and I'm not sure who else was in the circle, and my dad confirmed me a member of the church and said, "Receive the Holy Ghost," I started to sob. I've never seen another 8-year-old do it. And I couldn't stop crying. And so he gave me this blessing. And in even going back to our little row that our family sat on of folding chairs, with most of them having at least one leg sprung, so you're kind of lopsided. Like the whole meeting, I couldn't really quite get control of myself. And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because I was crying and I couldn't quite understand what it was. That's probably the first time I had an overwhelming manifestation of the Spirit, but I didn't know what it was.
Wow.
So here we are. We're going to this little teeny branch out in the middle of nowhere. And now I'm about a sophomore in high school. And I'm out in front of our farmhouse shooting baskets, because that's what I always did. If I had any minute that I wasn't farming, I was shooting baskets. And here comes driving up a car, a tall, lanky guy gets out, totally unfamiliar. I have no clue who he is. He asks if my father is at home, and I said, it's the middle of the afternoon in the summer. I said, no, my dad's at work. He's out in the field somewhere. So this guy says, well, are you Sheri? And I said, yeah. And here I am shooting baskets, and he said, well, my name is Brother Arnold. He said, I'm your new seminary teacher. We had never had seminary. So he had come out to start home study seminary.
Wow.
Out in our area of the mission field. And then he said, I'll bet I can beat you in a game of horse. And I said, I'm looking at him. He's tall and skinny. He doesn't look too formidable. And I said, I don't think so. And he whooped me. And we played a lot of games of horse during the next 2 years. And I'm not sure I ever beat him. He was so good. But the thing about Brother Arnold was, Robert Arnold, he was like this amazing gospel teacher. I mean, shout out to seminary teachers.
Yeah, yeah.
He was amazing. I can still remember how he taught certain lessons, certain stories. I mean, they've stuck with me. That's 50 years ago.
It's remarkable.
Or 45 years ago. And absolutely in that period, I knew that there was never a question for me of did I believe, but he's probably the one who opened my eyes to saying, oh, the gospel can be really interesting and kind of fun. And he made me want to do more than read the scriptures. He made me want to understand them. He made me want to be able to talk about them.
I love that.
Because I watched how he talked and how he taught, and I thought, oh, that's powerful. So somewhere in there, it started to be really clear to me that I really did believe, and I wanted to know more. That's longer than you wanted.
No.
That's
love
probably the
that.
story.
I love that. So when you think about like an evolution of a testimony, the scriptures clearly, like your own study, clearly has played a significant
Huge.
role. What would you say it was the combination for you of getting the doctrinal understanding and foundation that you have now today?
When I was growing up, I would say that the scriptures weren't emphasized in the same way that they are today. But I kind of loved the scriptures, and I think that part of it actually started with Grandma, because I loved my grandma, and she loved the scriptures, and I saw how she studied them, and she wrote in them, and she marked them up, and she wrote in the margins. So I think my behavior of doing that same thing is actually started because I saw my grandma do that, and she was, of course, the one I wanted to model after on that issue. Then my parents, of course, they taught us to fast. We had family prayer. We never missed a meeting. I mean, they were very, very actively involved. But the combination of Grandma and then Brother Arnold was a key figure in helping me say, I want to be able to teach like he can. I want to understand the scriptures like he does. That was something I hadn't really seen modeled before.
Yeah.
And that probably spurred on an inclination that was probably already there, planted by Grandma. But I think he spurred on the inclination to say, well, you're going to know a lot more than you know if you're going to be able to teach like Bob Arnold teaches. And that was probably a big instigator. And then it just kind of went from there. The inclination grew and became more and more important. Then it got wrapped up with my job. I turned out to be working in the field of Latter-day Saint publishing, and so then I had to know what I was talking about when I'm sitting across the table from Truman Madsen and editing Truman Madsen. You're kind of going, yeah, this is crazy. That's not even possible. So it forced me, if you will, and also invited me. So a combination of work and then church callings.
Yeah,
they just came in rapid succession, and you're saying, okay, I've got to go deeper and deeper. And by then I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so it became a pattern.
So kind of going with this theme of evolution in your spirituality, I've heard you teach before that learning the language of the Spirit is like learning a foreign language. Can you talk a little bit, which might be counter actually, because I know you believe it's a personal journey for everybody, but can you talk a little bit about what that was for you to learn the language of the Spirit? What did you do to become familiar with this foreign language of the way the Spirit speaks to us?
I had an experience in my early 20s when I had to make a major life decision. I'd prayed and prayed about it, and I'd fasted about it several times, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't figure it out. So I called a dear friend of mine. He and his wife were dear friends, and asked him if he'd give me a priesthood blessing. So I went to his home. He said, sure. And so I went to their home one evening, and he's asking me about this issue that I'm pondering and trying to figure out. And he said, well, Sheri, I know you've been praying about this, and I know you've been fasting about it. What is the Spirit telling you? I said, I don't know. I can't tell. I can't figure out if I'm making up answers in my head or what. And then I said to him, I can feel the Spirit, but I don't think I know how to receive direction from or hear the voice of the Spirit. I don't know how to do that. And he asked a very simple question in return. Well, have you ever asked? I said, asked what? And he said, have you asked the Lord to teach you what it feels like for you and what it sounds like to you when the Spirit is trying to communicate? I said, no, I don't think I've ever asked that. And he said, that's a great prayer to offer. And he said, and you're probably going to have to offer it the rest of your life. So I started asking that question to help me be able to discern. And then I started noticing things in the Scriptures. And the thing I noticed was, oh my goodness, look at all the times there is direct connection between heaven and somebody on earth. And every time I could see that, I'd put a little X in my margin of the Scriptures, little red X. Pretty soon, like, you could come to my house and see umpteen sets of Scriptures that have zillions of little red X's. And I thought, okay, the clues are in here about how you learn to discern what you're being prompted to do. I have no magic formula, anything like that. I have just asked for help in discerning the promptings of the Spirit. And what I can say now, many years later, is I can tell more often, more clearly, and I still, over some decisions, just labor and wrestle to figure it out. But in this regard, I've really been guided and bolstered by some teachings of Elder Bednar, and I won't do them justice. But I've actually heard him take questions from audiences of teenagers and young adults, and this question always comes up. I can't tell if I'm making it up or if I'm really getting an answer. And he'll say something to the effect, well, don't worry about it. Quit stressing about it. If you're trying to keep the commandments and you're trying to discern, just keep going forward and trust that the Lord is going to guide your path if you perchance start heading down a direction that maybe isn't in your best interest. Keep going forward. I try to think about that a lot. In addition to, I can say there are some times that I get an answer that's really clear, much clearer than it was 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And it's still a wrestle sometimes to get answers and to know, should I do this or not?
Which is oddly comforting, I have to say, to know that even where you are in your life, you still wrestle with that.
I still wrestle with it, and I feel like I should have made more progress than I have. But I absolutely can see a lot of progress, and I do think there are a lot of comparisons in learning a language. I think that's the reason, one of the reasons to be in the Scriptures on a regular basis, because that is the language the Spirit uses. And go read 2 Nephi 32, and it's very clear about the Spirit will tell you all things what you should do. And angels speak by the voice of the Spirit and so forth. So I think the Scriptures are in part designed to say you actually can communicate with heaven. It's totally counter to the way we communicate today, which I expect immediate Google answers.
Yep.
And it's just like so rarely an immediate answer to a big question.
Yeah. I have to say, I still remember, I think it was a Time Out from an event, which feels like eons ago. I remember you inviting the women to ask. the Lord how the Spirit communicates to them. And I did that challenge, and it truly was a critical pivot point in my life. So I have a witness that the Spirit itself will help you understand how he communicates.
Yeah, the Lord wants to talk to us.
Yeah.
He wants to talk to us. And it's just we let so much stuff get in the way, and I let so many things get in the way. But when we ask and are sincerely prayerful and listening and trying to figure it out, I think we get helped.
So in going along with kind of this idea of the Spirit and revelation, I'd love to talk a little bit about prophets. I'm not sure that I can think of anybody who's had the kinds of experiences that you've had with prophets, in part because you've been a biographer of several of them, and also just because of the unique combination of your church callings and your professional life. You've had so much exposure. What would you want covenant-keeping women to understand about prophets and prophetic revelation?
First of all, when you study the lives of prophets, and I have had the chance to do that in some detail in several instances, in retrospect, when you look back at their lives, the dots all connect. You can see the hand of the Lord in their lives in the most profound way, meaning you can see the Lord guiding them, leading them, tutoring them, getting them ready. So I think it's inspiring. It's not that they're perfect. It's not that any of that sort of thing. They've had to make their own decisions. They've had their own agency. But you can see the guiding hand of heaven preparing them and getting them ready for the appointed hour. So I think there's a reason to actually study their lives, because you can watch God operating in the lives of these men and the women they marry. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I guess I would jump to this question. Who would you rather put your life in the hands of? Sometimes, the narrative today that we hear sometimes is, yeah, but are they perfect? And have they made mistakes before? Because maybe they're making mistakes now. Are they perfect? No. And I know of no prophet that has claimed perfection. But I do think, there's a statement from Joseph Smith that says, I never said I was perfect, but there is no error in the revelations. So when we talk about perfection, I think we're asking the wrong question, or thinking about it in perhaps a way that's just down a side canyon that doesn't take us anywhere productive. To me, the more interesting thing is to say, okay, can you think of any leaders on the planet who have a more vested interest in your well-being? Can you think of any leaders who are less about making sure it's about them? They're not trying to get rich. They're not trying to get famous. They're not trying to get anything. In fact, if you read the scriptures, you kind of know that prophets get beat up a lot, and they always have. I had the wife of a member of the 12 some years ago say to me, can I just confess to you that sometimes I struggle a little bit to read the Book of Mormon because I see what happens to prophets, and I'm thinking about my husband. These men have been given all the priesthood keys that God will allow to be on the earth at a given time. And so I look at this and I say, into what leader's hands in the world today would you rather put your well-being? Can you think of a political leader, the leader of a country, a gold medal winner, the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize, a chairman of the board, a chief executive officer, a journalist? I can remember the days, this is how old I am, when Walter Cronkite was actually the most trusted man in America. Can you even fathom such a thing today?
Yeah.
That any journalist or frankly author or expert today would be seen that way? We just don't live in those times. And so I say, is there a blogger, a podcaster, a YouTuber, an influencer? Pick a category. An Academy Award winner, the most valuable player in the Super Bowl. Pick any level of some kind of excellence that we would respect because of some talent or whatever, but really, would you put your life in their hands? I just can't. I've made lists. I've been on long flights where I've said, okay, list every category you can think of. Is there anybody there you actually would listen to before you listen to President Russell M. Nelson, President Dallin H. Oaks, and President Henry B. Eyring, and 12 others? I can't come up with it. So I guess what I would just say is, into whose hands do you want to put your life? So while I don't absolutely do not believe that prophets are perfect. I think they are actually the most perfect leaders we have on this earth.
I love that concept, the most perfect leaders. That's a paradigm shift.
That's the best it gets.
Yeah.
We got no better.
Yeah.
In here, there's only one perfect being who's walked the earth. That's Jesus. So in the absence of having him walk to the pulpit on Sunday morning of General Conference, we have 15 prophets, seers, and revelators who have been called as special witnesses of him. They're all going to walk to the pulpit. Yeah, I'm going to listen to them with all due respect to everybody else. I'm going to listen to them differently than anybody else. And I can't come up with anybody that I think is better. So I say, I'm putting my life in their hands. Do I love everything they say? No, not always. Sometimes I have to gulp a little bit and think about something and say, okay, what do I do with that? How do I? And the prayer I ask then is, Heavenly Father, how would thou have me feel about that?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because sometimes maybe it's hard to hear because of my marital status. Maybe it's hard to hear because of some other reason that I just go, oh, that actually kind of kills me. But how would thou have me feel about that? But I'm looking for, show me somebody better. I'm open to seeing it. I just can't see it anywhere.
I felt that question. I felt that because that's a different question even than help me understand this or help me, but asking the Spirit, help me to know how I'm supposed to feel about this when something feels conflicting, right?
Or you don't understand it.
You don't understand
you go,
it.
I don't quite get that. And that feels hard to me. What do I do about that? How would thou have me feel about it? It took me years to come to that, to realize that's the question I should be asking. How would thou have me feel about it? And on some sensitive issues, I have found that when I repeatedly ask that question, the way my feelings are directed can even change a little. And it might be that I'm being led through a process of evolution or a process of growing, as we're all constantly growing. But how would thou have me feel about it?
I'm seeing a theme here, Sheri, that in all the years that I've known you, I've never connected. And maybe it's something that you're aware of is a spiritual gift of yours, but you've learned how to ask the right questions. And that surely has been something that you have relied on in your life. Are there others? Are there other questions that would bless the lives of women if they would just slightly change? Because you've given us two, and I'm sitting here thinking, wow, is that one of the things that has helped make you, is that you've learned to ask the right questions?
I don't know if this is what you have in mind, but the other thing I would say that I do, and I'm not sure when this started exactly, but I ask a lot of questions of a lot of people. And it's possible, I'm not sure I can track it to this, but it kind of feels like I can. It was certainly enhanced by the time I spent studying the life of President Hinckley, and then all the times I got to be in his presence, including more than once I had the chance to sit next to him or at the table he was at a dinner somewhere. Oh my goodness, that man never stopped asking questions. Whoever's at the table, he was going to ask questions through the whole meal. And he was conversant on every topic. And so for years now, I have found myself, whenever I get a chance, and it's just kind of a natural thing for me to just ask questions. And a favorite question is, so let's say I have a returning mission leader. Tell me what you know today that you didn't know 3 years ago.
I have heard you ask that question.
So I'm a believer in that.
Yeah.
I'm a believer in that question to say,
Yeah.
give someone a time-specific period and say, what did you learn from that? Because maybe I will never have that experience.
Yeah.
Tell me what you've learned. And so I ask that a lot of a lot of people. Tell me what you know now that you didn't know before. And it's amazing. For example, my goodness, I don't know how many returning mission leaders I've asked that question of, but they all say the same thing. I mean, I've got to have asked that question 200 times. They all say, we didn't fully appreciate how much the Lord is involved in individual lives, and we've now seen it. These missionaries helping this person, or this ward member, or this branch member able to reach out here, and then this connection's made over here. We've just seen it over and over and over again. So isn't that a beautiful thing to say? People who've been on the ground, boots on the ground, been working so hard to gather Israel, and they've all seen, yeah, God is really involved in individual people's lives. So I love asking, what do you know now? That's another question.
Okay, well, with that, I want to turn that question to you. So with the experiences that you've had, what do you know today that you didn't know even 10 years ago?
Oh, gosh, let's see. I know a lot of things. I feel even more deeply about prophets. That only builds. I've had the chance during the presidency of President Russell M. Nelson to, because of different assignments, sometimes observe his style. And I've seen how his kindness and his gentleness often brings out the best in people, how inclusive he is. He and his counselors in any room have got to be the smartest people in the room. I mean, my goodness, the three of them are amazing. And yet, if they invite you into a room with them, they're going to ask you what you think. And I kind of think, oh, who cares what I think? No matter what room I'm in with them, I'm the lowest on the totem pole. So I've watched him show that kind of respect and that kind of inclusion. I know some things about that. I know that aging is harder than it looks. Helping aging parents is harder than it looks. I know that one of the things I have found myself thinking about, for the last half of a year, maybe this year, is how grateful I am for the people that the Lord has brought into my life to help me, tutor me, correct me, motivate me. People that in different times, like a Bob Arnold, a little shout out to the seminary teacher.
I love that.
That really sparked something in me, back to grandma, back to mother and dad, but then you start thinking about all these other interesting merge points where you can see how much that person, just a little bit of support, made all the difference in the world, or a little bit of recognizing, Sheri, I think you could do this, and I'll help you. So one of the things that I think I do feel and know better than a few years ago is how much we absolutely need each other and how much influence we can have in each other's lives. We probably recognize it. This is not a good statement maybe, but we may recognize it more in retrospect than in the moment. Sometimes you know it in the moment.
Yeah.
But sometimes you look back and think, how would I ever have gotten from point A to B or C to D if I hadn't had this person step in and help? And boy, I feel increasingly indebted to so many people and grateful for them.
Yeah, it makes me think, that Brother Arnold surely could not have had any idea, like the influence he was having on this little young teenage girl in Ulysses, Kansas.
What an amazing guy. He was amazing.
And
he was amazing.
We all have that opportunity. I love that. I want to ask you, because your professional life right now has you in the middle of just being aware of a lot of things politically and in the news and current events. And it feels like things are just so bad and hard and ugly and divisive. And I'm just curious, when you think about the state of the world right now, what gives you reason to be encouraged? What gives you reason to be hopeful? We're entering in the U.S., we're entering a political election year, and you look around, you could be living anywhere, and every place seems to have turmoil.
Sometimes I have to say to myself, because you can get a little nervous, but sometimes I say to myself several things. First of all, that President Hinckley used to say, the only thing I regret is that I'm old enough that I won't be around to see everything that's going to happen. And then we have President Nelson, who repeatedly has said, the best is yet to come. So I sit back and think, well, when I start getting a little nervous and anxious about how to better prepare for the rest of my life, because I used to be the youngest person in every room, and now I'm sometimes the oldest person in the room, and I kind of hate it. But I'm very mindful about preparing. What does this look like? And I think, okay, rather than get anxious about it, you've got prophets who are saying the best is yet to come. And Scripture's saying, if you are prepared, you shall not fear. So again, another prayer I found myself answering is, help me prepare for the future. What does that look like? And that's probably a great prayer no matter how old you are.
I love that.
How do I best prepare for the future? Please guide me, that I've got thoughts and impressions or people come into my life who can give me suggestions that make me think, oh, I should be thinking about that. I haven't been thinking about XYZ. I'm so glad somebody mentioned XYZ. I need to go think about that and do something about it. So I think it's prophets that make me think it'll be okay. I never in a billion zillion years thought I would be this age and not married. Wow, I feel like I've had so many spiritual promptings and reassurances that wouldn't be the case. I clearly don't know how to interpret those. But being unmarried at this age is actually scarier than being unmarried at 30. And so I find myself praying a lot. Well, I don't know what the future is going to bring. How do I get prepared? And help, lead me, guide me, walk beside me.
Yeah.
I'm kind of right back in primary, and few words that are more meaningful than those. And prophets have said the best is yet to come. And gee, I just wish I weren't so old and could live to see everything. And that makes me think, okay, you'll do the best you can and you'll be okay.
That's a great paradigm shift with everything going on in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you for that reminder. And I would love to know what you've learned about the influence of covenant-keeping women.
Where do I begin? There is no way to measure. There's no way to measure, and I think there's no limit on the influence of a covenant-keeping woman. A woman who is connected to heaven and trying to be guided to the best of her ability, the best of all of our abilities. If you look at any family, any ward, any stake, any branch or district, any unit, I could take it right into the workplace perhaps. The influence that women have is like endless. I've said for years, blindfold me, put me in front of a map, let me throw a dart. Wherever it lands, I'll get on a plane and go there. And I'm telling you right now that give me a few hours, I can find covenant-keeping women who can hold their own with any women in the planet. And I remember hearing now President Jeffrey R. Holland say, and I think I've heard him say this more than once, that he loves his brethren, he follows the prophet, but the person with the greatest influences in his life was, and probably still is, Patricia Terry Holland. So when you really look at the touch points where women have astonishing influence, it's one-on-one. It's mother to child, wife to husband. Who has more influence on teenage boys than teenage girls?
That's so true.
Nobody. Aunts can say things to their nieces and nephews, and grandmas to their grandchildren that they never forget. Not to mention their mothers, nothing like mother, but there are other female voices that can really resonate. And then you go into a ward, my goodness, I'm not trying to undermine in the least those who have keys and are presiding over a ward or a stake or so forth. But at least half the work in a ward, and probably way more than half, is being done by the women. It's the teaching, it's the testifying, it's the picking up loose ends and making sure things all knit together. That's why, remember when President Hinckley used to say, I'm the president of the church, and my adult kids call and say, hi, Dad, can I talk to Mom? Right? I mean, that's exactly what happens. I tease my brother, who's married to just a fabulous, fabulous woman whose grandkids adore her. And I always look at Brad and just feel a little bit badly for him. I think, well, you're never going to overcome Grandma here, because Grandma just has this thing with the grandkids, and they love their grandpa, right? They really do. But Grandma's just Grandma. And when you watch that influence going from generation to generation, it's actually kind of profound. So how do you measure it?
Yeah.
I don't know how you measure it, but I think the influence of women tend to be exceptionally good one-on-one, and sometimes exceptionally good in front of a large group. I'm not trying to typecast anything. I'm just saying those interpersonal things, women have got an edge. And that's where change happens. It happens one-on-one. That's where growth often happens. It happens one-on-one.
I love that, Sheri. Thank you. I think one of the best things about you is that you seem to be completely unaware of your own impact and influence. And I would tell stories, but you would not like me. And so I'm going to keep those to myself. But I just so appreciate you've said so many things just today that have helped me pivot a little bit. And my pattern with you in my life is that you've been an important pivot point. So as we wrap up, I would just love for you to share with us something that you, and I know this is hard because there's so many things, but something that you just deeply know to be true that is something you wish every woman could know for herself.
I imagine that everybody who has studied the gospel in any kind of depth has questions. I have plenty of questions. Some are doctrinal, and the doctrinal questions are largely questions that I just haven't yet studied enough to understand. I have procedural questions. There are procedures in the church that I think, I don't understand that, and I kind of wish, in my limited view, I wish they could change. So I have questions about that. And I have a host of personal questions. But I wish every woman could understand that those questions aren't necessarily connected to my testimony. My testimony stands on some fundamentals, and I think everybody's testimony stands on some fundamentals. If you know and can say that you know that God is our Father, and I absolutely know that Jesus is the Christ and our Savior and our Redeemer and our advocate with the Father, and I absolutely believe that the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. I know that as well as I know my own name, that Joseph was absolutely a prophet. I am certain he was a prophet. And that we have a prophet today who at this moment is Russell M. Nelson. If you know those things, you know the gospel's true, independent of my list of questions that are all good ones, meaning good in that they mean something to me. Every time I get a question answered or partially answered, it can build my testimony. So questions, asking good questions is, I think, important to building testimony. But just because you have unresolved questions doesn't mean you don't have a testimony. And I wish that our remarkable sisters all understood that the first and foremost things that can actually give your life stability and a feeling like you have a foundation that isn't going to move around on you, the first thing is to say, do you know those 5 things? And if you can get a testimony of those things, you got a testimony. So you can quit asking yourself, is the gospel true? Is the gospel true? I sure don't like what the brethren just announced. Is the gospel true? No. Put that aside. The gospel is true. Now, give yourself a chance to ask questions to keep growing. And I think it was, I wish I could quote President Holland perfectly, and I can't, but he said in one of his many profound messages, he said, hold on to the truth you already have, and we may not know everything now, but we will. And so to me, the thing that is really something that makes me sad is to see somebody churning and churning over the question of, is this the gospel of Jesus Christ? Because they've still got questions. Well, of course you do. If you're alive and breathing and thinking, you've got questions, I think. Yeah. Get settled in your testimony and then start asking more questions. And little by little, some will get answered. For me, many have been answered along the way, and I expect more to be answered. And I imagine that I will step across the veil still with some really big questions that won't be answered until some later time. But I'm willing to live with that because I don't think any other organization has the power that the church has because of the priesthood keys. And that's probably the most profound reason that I say, yeah, I'm going to put my life in the hands of those prophets. Nobody else is the same. That's what I wish everybody knew.
Sheri, thank you. This has been such a gift, and I've felt a witness of the Spirit several times, and I hope our friends listening, regardless of what they're doing in their life right now, I hope they've been able to feel what I have felt today talking to you. And I just want to thank you for paying the price, to know what you know and to be able to teach what you've come to know. I think that in and of itself is a good reminder for all of us that we don't get to just have the experiences and have the knowledge that someone like you has had without paying the price for ourselves. So thank you. I actually feel oddly encouraged to go pay the price a little bit better so that I can come to know some of these things even more deeply. And I appreciate the encouragement that even you still have questions and still wrestle with knowing if the Spirit's speaking to you. I think that resonates with all of us. So just thank you so much for being with us today, Sheri.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. And before you go, we have to tell you about our events coming this fall. Have you been feeling lately like you need to recharge your spiritual batteries? Well, we have just the thing for you. Join us for Lift Up Your Heart, a Magnify gathering. This is a day-long event meant for women to gather, recharge, listen to inspiring speakers, live music, and most importantly, be reminded of what we already know, that Jesus Christ is our answer and that we're not alone. It's everything you loved about Time Out for Women and more, and it's coming to a city near you. The best part is if you're a listener, you get a special discount code at checkout. So register now by following the link in our show notes and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get $10 off each registration. That's code podcast10, PODCAST10 at checkout. The first city that's open is Plano, Texas, and it's coming September 24th, and registration is open now. We can't wait to see you there.